Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host of this session of Cut the Crop. And today my guest is Vanessa Winning, who's the CEO of Irrigation New Zealand. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you very much for having me. Very excited.
That's right. Well, I think we did have you doing a podcast quite soon after you started as the CE. And so it's interesting to just see how the last couple of years have played out in Irrigation New Zealand. And I mean, I won't ask you to describe what Irrigation New Zealand is and what you do, because I think everyone knows that. But I think it would be interesting to know just how many members you've got and what your membership is made up of, because I think that's probably something that would be of interest to the listeners.
Yeah, sure. Membership organisation, people choose to be part of our organisation. We've got around about 3,800 members across the country. We do have a larger majority sitting in Otago and Canterbury, as you'd expect, where the majority of irrigation currently sits. We have horticulture, arable, sheep and beef, and dairy customers, and we operate with large schemes all the way through to independent irrigators. We have all the supply companies, so the organisations that do the design and setup and installation. A lot of councils, so what people probably aren't aware of is all your recreational parks, your golf courses, etc. That generally gets irrigated, so they are members of ours. And we also have a few stadiums as well throughout the country. So, a big one that's growing actually is retirement villages, because they have a lot of green spaces.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, actually, I never thought of that. So, you said 3,800. I mean, how many of those would be arable growers?
Oh, it's hard to say because generally they come within a bigger scheme. Most of our arable growers are within scheme settings, but roughly about 58% of all our arable growing is under irrigation. So I would suggest that of that 3,500 to 3,800 groups that we've got, that would have a reasonable amount of arable. In fact, probably historically larger than other areas. So it's really interesting when you look at the numbers, because people assume it's dairy or they assume it's animal agriculture, and I think it's about 26% of dairy product is made through irrigation. Arable, as I said, about 56% is it requires irrigation. So it's really important to keep the concept around water grows plants rather than water grows animals.
Yeah, and actually that's a really good point, because we know this because we experience this, our growers, that the general public, when you talk about irrigation, they immediately make the assumption that it's basically underpinning the intensification of dairy, and they see that as a negative thing, and that's not necessarily based on anything other than sort of emotion or I guess media perception. But irrigation supports a wide range of horticulture, vegetable and arable growing, and I don't think that the general public fully understand the value of irrigation from that perspective. How do you manage to get that commentary out there, to get a more positive commentary around the value of irrigation?
It is really hard, because we do go up against, especially the very strong NGOs, and they do have loud voices and they stick to a particular commentary and very few words, and they're very articulate at it. And so there is definitely this misconception and link between irrigation equals intensified dairy. The fact is that regenerative dairy actually requires more irrigation than non-regenerative dairy, as you would expect, because you're more concerned about the growth of the plant and you can't bring in imported feed. So you're even more aware of how your plants are growing. The other part to that is that 90% of our fruit and veggies, that the vast majority of which is consumed in New Zealand, is under irrigation. You compare that to, let's say, 26% of our milk products, but only 20% of our pasture that is being used by dairy is under irrigation. There's quite a difference. And I think I guess what we've tried to do is really convince the people who have power, so governments, local government, central government, and people in decision-making, policy-making settings, to understand where irrigation is used and why it's so important, and why in particular storage and capture is so important. And we're still on a journey there. There is also the component of irrigation that while there is reasonable amount in dairy, if you think about the Canterbury region, the period of time that dairy farmers are utilising irrigation tends to be the period of time where arable farmers are not using it. And so it is quite a nice symbiotic relationship to have a mixture of farming types within a setting, so that all parts of that farming cycle can operate without extracting all at the same time from, if we're using it from a waterbed. And so I think there's a real lack of understanding about who gains and who uses, and then also who gives up at certain periods of time, and when that time is that people are needing that water. It's a hard one, Alison, because people don't really care. I would say the majority of Aucklanders, for example, they only care when it's something that impacts on their lives, and I can say that I'm an Aucklander. And so you don't really get involved in things that don't have a day-to-day impact on you. So you're constantly trying to get through those other sound bites, and you're constantly trying to put a message across that people may or may not pick up on, and that's really hard. But what it's doing is it's holding back development, and in particular it's holding back our horticulture and arable farmers from being able to store and capture water as a group in a scheme type setting. And what it's doing is it's also making us less adaptable to climate change, because we're not growing the storage and capture opportunities where we are needing to, when rain is falling when we don't need it, for when rain is not falling or snow is not melting when we do need it. So we have a few things to clean up, and opportunities like this, or talking to the media, or talking to Urban New Zealand, those are opportunities we try and take as often as we can.
Yeah. And from hearing me talk at various conferences, I mean, I think this is the biggest opportunity for New Zealand is, to have a fair and equitable, process for water capture and storage and making it available, because it's going to be our biggest point of difference as we move forward under, sort of extreme climate change scenarios. Other countries don't have, water, and are going to really struggle to be able to sort of, grow, high quality produce. And we're sitting here with a relative abundance of water, and it's going to be, it's going to be like gold. And we have not worked through how we can take advantage of that resource in a sustainable way that is going to be able to drive sort of our economy forward. And it is so frustrating.
Oh, tell me about it. I mean, I regularly have those conversations, because it's not just for the growth of plants and food. It's also for drinking water, for hydroelectricity. It's also for flood mitigation. And so when we start talking about a strategy around water, we often forget productive use, and we have the other components. And often we think hydro must mean these big, massive dams, which in these days does not necessarily need to happen. And I think the issue that we've got is we're trying to fight this narrative that's been around for a long period of time. And we are also, we take it for granted. We take for granted that we're going to have rain at the right period of a growing cycle, and we often have. We take for granted that snow is going to melt at the same time as when we need the water, the alpine water to feed our plants. Those things have done us really well in the past. As you say, weather is changing, extremes are happening, we're getting more droughts. If you had told people in the Waikato 30 years ago that they would need irrigation, they would have laughed at you. But as we move further and further into changing climate, changing extremes, we are needing water in places that we've never really needed to have water before. And in order to give farmers choices in what they're going to grow, and in particular in growing homegrown feed, be that arable or other elements that they might decide to mix up their crops on an animal producing farm, then they need water. And it's not just needing water, they need reliance around that water. And that reliability really needs to be in the high 90s, because that will mean that they're way more efficient. So when you talk to an arable farmer, if they've got really resilient, reliable water, they're actually less likely to put that water on in periods of time where they don't need it. If that reliability drops down, there is more waste in the system, because they don't know for sure that when they're going to need that water, it's actually going to be available to them. So it's really important that we not only that we have storage and capture of water to assist our river run type approach, but also that we can increase the reliability. And the more reliable it is, the less wastage we have and the improvements for the environment that we have. And I think those stories just don't seem to permeate through, because it needs to be explained. And you know this, you're a scientist. Explaining is losing, right? So as soon as you have to start explaining something, you've lost your audience. And so I think we do have to do a better job across all of our industry groups at trying to find out what those little sound bites are, and really articulating them well, having our elevator pitches and being able to clarify people's concerns. And that's on us, I think, expecting people to educate themselves and to understand what we are, needing to do. That's just not a fair expectation. And I think all of our groups can do a better job at articulating the why around what's so important about capturing water when it's falling, storing it, having it available for when it's not storing, and what that means from an environmental impact perspective, and how much better we can be, not worse, but better that we can be if we can do it well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just talk about sort of water use efficiency. If you're an arable farmer in Canterbury, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you think that our arable farmers are utilising, the irrigation technology in the most efficient way, or do you think that there are still improvements to be made?
I think that we're probably at about 90%. I think if I think about the Canterbury region in particular, I think they are probably the most efficient and most knowledgeable of most of the regions, because they've had to be, because they've had, farm environment planning for a lot longer than other regions. They've had to rely on water use. They've had to be more efficient with their water use than other areas. So I would suggest that there are some growers who are outstanding, and there are some that could improve. There is a lot of new technology, and we are seeing a lot of stuff coming out of California, out of parts of the Middle East, because they're not taking water for granted like we do. So they're advanced a lot further than we are, that we could actually learn from. And I think you never stand still. As a farmer or a grower, you never stand still. There's always new things that you can take up, always new things that you can consider. And I think that's probably where we're at the moment. We've got some farmers who are cutting edge, leading edge, total precision farmers. And, we've got, like, for example, the likes of a Craig McKenzie who's been out there, travels the world, figures out what's going on and brings it back home, and then tries to support others. Your chair, for example, Steve and his family, they have got some really good operations sitting on their farm, and they utilise their land so that they've always got the right amount of water for whatever they're growing in that land, and enough time for that land to regenerate as well. There are others that could improve. And when I drive through the Canterbury area and I see irrigation, seeping onto roads, for example, that really irks me. It's such a waste. But it's not just a waste. It's also it brings in a negative connotation that people don't know what they're doing. It could easily just be, something faulty with their system, but that's where you need to be really onto it so that you're not just changing how you're using, but you're also improving the perception of people who are likely to be driving through and making an assumption as they do so. Don't get me wrong, a lot of councils regularly waste water, and we've got a lot of work to do there as well. So urban New Zealand are very inefficient when it comes to water use, and we saw that with the Auckland droughts. Gosh, I wish we had one at the moment, I've got to say. Way too much rain. But 3 years of drought conditions essentially for Auckland, we reduced water usage by 40%. People didn't even really notice it. So I think we can all improve. It's easier to kind of point to something that you can visually see than someone's wastage on a personal household. So to answer your question, I think, Canterbury's probably up there in terms of efficiency. Absolutely, there's still things that they can improve. The rest of the country, where water is probably taken for granted slightly more, I think that there is more improvement that can be made.
So you mentioned sort of lots of new technologies, from Israel and from California. Can you give us, a bit of a summary of what some of those technologies are that you think that would add real value if they were adopted here?
Yeah, I think definitely the moisture probing and the nitrogen probes that you can actually see what nutrients you've got from further down into the soils. Any of the performance assessment testing, so anything that's coming back into regular weather patterns and into the internet and through satellite and the Internet of Things, the IoT as they say. There's a lot of new technologies. A lot of it is around software. Though it is really important also to note that while we have new technology, you can't underestimate the importance of a walk or the visual. And I think you'll always have both. But what it will help with is some of those more management decisions, that more precision type of application. And what we're seeing with Israel is definitely the monitoring and the ability to turn water on without even needing to necessarily move out of your shed, or the ability to move your systems around the farm without having to be doing it physically. And I think what we're going to see is more and more of that. But as I say, it's still really important for you to walk your farm, to see what's going on, and to spot the things that aren't happening, and also to test. I think performance testing is going to become more of a regular thing rather than just something that people are doing at the moment from a compliance perspective. People will actually be able to go, actually, I need to do a little bit more and understand why is that particular paddock taking more of this water than this particular paddock when I look at those moisture sensing. Is it just because the soil that I'm dealing with is different, or is it actually because the application is different? And so I think there will be more understanding of the interconnectedness of what's going on in the weather, what's happening with the soils, how things are playing out, but also how application is going to play out along with it. And we're definitely seeing some things coming through from NIWA in New Zealand, and we're definitely seeing some things coming through from some of the larger satellite operations throughout the world as well.
So, just to sort of finish off, what are the key things that you're focused on at the moment? You've got like a bit of a finger in a number of camps, the political side of things, the regulatory side of things, the technology side of things. So what are your big ticket items for the remainder of the year?
Look, I think this election is going to be really interesting for all of us. We're going to have probably a more extreme election process than we've had for a little while. So rather than central kind of elements to our government structures, we're more likely to have a centre government that's more influenced on the left or more influenced on the right. Either way, that means that we are going to have to be better at telling the agricultural story and what it is that we need. And for New Zealand, the number one enabler is water. And I'm not saying that just because of the job that I have. It is the number one thing that we need to be thinking about strategically for the country. And so for us, for the next 4 or 5 months will be, how do we ensure that all sides of the spectrum understand the importance of capture and storage for the whole country, in particular those parts of the country that are getting more of the extremes, the Northlands, the Hawke's Bays, the East Coast. How do we ensure that there is a strategic approach to water capture and storage that supports flood mitigation and application at the same time? And the only way we're going to be able to do that is really in the advocacy space and really getting out there and talking to people and helping them understand that actual irrigation, in particular, efficient water use, is environmentally enhancing, not damaging. And that's not an easy thing to do, but that's really the focus for us for the next little while. And then, of course, all the regulation that's coming at us at the moment, there's quite a few changes that are happening all at the same time, and just being on top of that with our farmers, supporting them to make the changes that need to happen. Ultimately, a lot of those changes will improve their environmental impact, but also quite a few of them will have supportive financial impacts as well, because precision application of fertilizer and water will actually reduce your costs. So the more we can support farmers in doing the right things, rather than because it's regulation, but actually because it's the right thing to do from their land perspective and also from productivity perspective, then I think we'll get the change that we're trying to drive through.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Vanessa. It's always interesting to have a good chinwag with you. Any last final comments to the listeners?
I just think let's be nice to each other for the next little while. I think this election's going to be a bit rough for a few of us. There's going to be a lot of change and a lot of discussion, and I think, look out for your mates and just put your best foot forward and tell your good stories. Don't go down those rabbit holes.
Absolutely in agreement with that. Great. Thank you very much, Vanessa. And thank you very much, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.